Welcome to the IT Documentation and User Groups monthly webinar. This presentation is about documenting your documentation, and we're going to cover such silly things as the process, which is far better than it used to be when it was the procedure back when I first did it in around 2005 or so. Yes, that's a real story. All right, so just a little bit about ITDUG. It's an acronym. We're on Facebook, and you can look at some of our past webinars at our website, eurekaprocess.com/ITDUG. I don't always get a chance to have Tracy back in the same room for webinar, but she's here with us today, our founder, and I would love to let her introduce herself and how she founded the group. Tracy, welcome back. Oh,
great. Thanks, Alan. Hi, everyone. Yes, I started a Facebook page called ITDUG Users Group. Gosh, it's been 2.5 years ago. I'm trying to remember, 2 years ago. And I started it because I didn't know what I was doing with documentation. I couldn't find any resources. I couldn't find anybody to really ask how to document stuff. So I started the users group in Facebook for ITDUG, but I quickly realized that documentation is the same no matter what platform you're using, and it's the same challenge. And it really doesn't matter what your tool is. We've got the same challenges as IT people, whether we're owning our own companies or working for corporations. So the group grew, and I needed more expertise, and I asked Alan to join. And during that time, we changed the name to IT Documentation Users Group so that everybody would feel welcome in the group, and it really didn't matter which platform you were using. So basically, I started the group because I didn't know what I was doing, and so I could learn more. I owned an MSP, in Lexington, Kentucky. We focus on compliance, and I've been, doing this for 20 years now. Just hit my 20-year anniversary last month.
Congrats.
And been doing MSP since I converted my company back in 2012. I signed up my first MSP clients. So that's what I do. And I am, of course, leading the documentation. Now I need to get it all out of my brain into Glue so that when I faced some health challenges last year, my company ran really without my having to be so involved. So that was my goal with Glue all along, was to get everything out of my brain, share it with my staff, get everybody on board, and hopefully retire early. That is the long-term plan.
You got to test your documentation system pretty heavily last year.
I did, because I missed a lot of time because of my health issues, and and work from home tests you too. Good Lord, my staff is scattered in different households. Now we're half in, half out of the office. Half the team comes in one week, the other half the next week. So if we do have the virus, somebody does have it, we're not infecting the whole team, and we're not all down at the same time. That's the goal. So far so good. Nobody in my team has had it. So
very good.
And everything turned out pretty good in 2020, despite all the challenges. So happy to be here. Yes.
Glad to have you in here again. It's been a few meetings.
Yep.
Well, the group has continued to grow thanks to our members helping other members. In 2019, we hit 1,000. Last year, we hit 2,000. And here we are early in the year already at 3,000 members, and it continues to climb. Feel free to invite, especially like-minded folks, so we can get more help, more questions, more answers to helping each other grow. I'm giving our presentation today based on some documents we've developed for other IT services firms. It's why I agreed to co-admin with Tracy, because we love documentation, and while we consult on processes in general, it's all about documentation. So just a little bit about me. I've been doing this for a very long time. I've owned an MSP, I've sold an MSP, and I've led others with some great success, and founded this company, where we literally work with clients day in and day out inside the business in almost every area imaginable. So we've had a chance to test a lot of these processes and adapt and see how they change. So we're going to dive in. Do feel free to ask questions during the presentation. Veronica or Tracy or Brooke or Adam will interrupt if they need to get my attention, or we can cover them at the end. I do have a broken slide coming up, so I probably will take 30 seconds to fix that, just so you know. I know it's going to happen. but we'll get started, and you'll see me fumble with that one slide coming up. So first of all, I think there are 4 types of documentation. Just to give us a lay of the land, we have the documentation of our internal processes, whether they're for your team or client facing. This would be such things as how do you open the office or close the office? How do you submit timesheets and time entries? And it's this type of stuff that we'll probably talk the most about today, because we're talking about how you document your documentation. So that tends to be a type of internal process. But there are other processes, other documentation types. There's your technical processes, how to solve technical issues, knowledge bases, wikis, etc. There's also your time entries. That's a type of documentation. It's your audit log of what you actually did. And of course, client asset documentation, which is what already exists, including passwords. We'll touch a little bit on this today, but if you're interested in client asset documentation, our YouTube channel at Eureka Process has last month's ITDUG presentation on it, where we covered client asset documentation in great detail. So this is all about know thyself, and the next slide is the broken slide, and you're going to watch me fix it. We're going to do a quick poll about what is know thyself. And if you know yourself. Now, know thyself is also a form of meta knowledge. It means information about yourself. What I'm doing right now is I'm getting my username and password plugged into here. Thank goodness for password managers. And let's see if I can even get the right poll to come up the first try. Previous poll. We've done lots of polls on ITDUG before. And I'm going to keep going until we get to our current poll. I had no idea we had this many polls. All right, I think I'm going the wrong direction. If you guys are recording and you want to play back, you can always see all of these wonderful results. Here we go. Quite a simple question. Do you document your documentation? If you'd like to place a vote so we can all kind of see how our audience is polling, go to swiftpolling.com, enter the code 14795, or you can text your vote to 205-883-8760. And this will all show up live here in just a moment. So I'm going to change this to results. Let's look at it as a pie chart. So a majority say yes at 75%. I assume that's like 3 out of 4 people. We're early on. We can always come back to this chart later. But most of you are documenting your documentation, which is great. So for those, you might get some new ideas from here or some ideas of things to add. And for those of you not documenting your documentation, here's some great places to start. All right, so let's do the documentation. What is it we have to write down? So here are, first of all, the 4 key documents that we use. The process, as I mentioned. We're going to review naming standards today. It's important to know how to record and find the information that you're documenting. So we have to put that in writing. Very similar to that, we have the password naming standards. And of course, the document that we reviewed in great detail last month, which was asset documentation. So we're going to cover some of these. One piece of repeat from the last presentation, though, because this is so key, are the terms necessary and sufficient. These are 2 questions or 2 words you should test all of your decision-making by. Is it necessary, and is this sufficient? Do I absolutely have to have this, and do I have everything I need? Basically, we're looking for the minimum viable product. And while you might not be a fan of minimums, if it's too much, it's not going to get done. So we want to lower the burden as much as possible for recording this data. So we're looking for what is the minimum information necessary, yet enough information to be sufficient to answer any questions that we have. Because if it's too little, it's not going to be useful. So it's just a reminder, some quick things to test: necessary and sufficient. Okay, will I ever use this again? If not, please don't bother writing it down. When will someone reference this? The reason I asked that isn't really a yes, no. It's okay if they're working on a particular thing when they're accessing it, is there other information around them at the time that might help inform them? Is this data already available somewhere else? And if so, can we just link to it to make it easier? How much stuff should your person already know? And we're actually going to have a couple of examples in here where we're going to write to a level based on that person's knowledge. Is this easier to find somewhere else? Every now and then I've found a tech article that's honestly just easier to Google than it is to record our own answer. All right, so when they come to the screen, what questions are they likely asking at this time before you write it down? And then is it always? So be wary of how you document exceptions. Don't create giant masses of rules to handle occasional exceptions. You always want to write process to the rule to free up your people to handle exceptions with the incredible intelligence you've hired them for. So let's dive into the first one. I saw some smirks on faces when I said the word procedure, which became process. It essentially just covers where to store your documentation, where to store your processes, what are you storing in there, and how do you write it? So let's cover the various types of processes we want to do. So there's internal technical processes. These are step-by-step instructions that a technician should be able to follow. Therefore, beware of click-by-click instructions and screenshots. Your technicians should have a certain level of understanding on how things work, and we don't want to explain this as we are to a client. It's the wrong audience. So here's an example. We want to explain to our internal process of how to reset a password in Active Directory. Well, don't go, click here, click there, click here, click there, because our techs should know how to reset a password. However, we do need to document our way of doing it because there are a lot of ways to reset a password. So perhaps your method, I gave one example here that I was hoping that everybody thought of. We go to ConnectWise Automate or your RMM, deploy a script from a certain folder, and then document your notes. So that would tell somebody who is a technician how to operate it without telling them exactly what screens to go to or to log into a server and click here, click there when there's another way. Further, I had a small naming process to this. I just put the word SOP dash in front of it. It might seem a little silly, but to me, the beautiful part of putting that SOP dash in front of it is since most of us are probably already have some documentation, you can see what's been done the right way or the new way versus what's the old way, and it helps you sort them into categories. And we have a couple other categories you might see later as well. And of course, store those in your client organization or customer folder. And I have listed a folder name. Your folder names can certainly be different, but document what those are so everybody knows exactly what folder to put there. Let's call this piece bonus content. We've had some past ITDUG presentations on this before, but for technical processes, inside facing, I know in ConnectWise, you have type, subtype, and item. In Autotask, you have issue and sub-issue, and you have similar concepts in other PSAs. I will frequently map our internal technical processes to match a folder structure that matches type and subtype or issue and sub-issue. So consider that as well to help you sort what's typically voluminous for us IT providers, which are technical processes. Client-facing instructions, these are different for two reasons: different audience and different security, because this might be available to the public. So these instructions are for clients to actually read themselves. So the difference is here, because of the different audience, we do want screenshots and click-by-click instructions because we're teaching a client who might not be technical how to do these things. Keep the same naming convention. And the biggest difference, as I mentioned, is security. So you do have to ask a couple of questions and decisions. You can answer these however you see fit or however your documentation system platform supports. But for example, if let's say you follow the same process the client follows, You might leave them in the same folder as the previous slide, but perhaps have to give security permissions so that the public can see that, or teach your technicians how to share that link or the content of that link. Of course, if it's only for the clients to follow, you might actually store it in some sort of external folder that has permissions for the public to see. Or if it's for one client, store it in their folder and only give them access to it. So think through it. Necessary and sufficient. What is the minimum set of instructions you can give, so that 80% of everything you're going to write about your client-facing instructions will fit. But do keep in mind, you have to determine, is this for internal use as well, generally your client's use, or specific clients. 3 important things that I do feel are necessary and sufficient to help you document your client-facing instructions. Another piece that of processes that we have to learn how to process are technical best practices. I'm not a big fan of these, but some people are, so I wanted to include it. This is not a step-by-step guide. This is not an if this, then do this, or a step 1, step 2, step 3. This is simply, hey, when you're configuring this type of thing, these results should occur. Maybe it was setting up Exchange best practices, turning off open relays, setting a maximum file size or maximum message size. Those types of things would be best practices that might not be in a step-by-step guide. So to separate those from your SOPs, I just put a BP in front of it, or maybe in a folder called best practices, depending on how you want to sort those. But make the decision. My favorite part is internal processes. It's in our name, Eureka Process. That's why it's written 3+ times in this slide. Internal processes are not for the technical resolution. So all the stuff above does not apply here. Some examples are, what are the types of things that would be an internal process? The process is an internal process. Some other examples would be, we have some documents called Ways to Succeed, which is, hey, I know we have a lot of documentations and rules, so we create one document that's, here's the top 10 general things to keep in mind when working for us. It didn't include things like, if it's not in your PSA, it didn't happen. If it's not in your documentation system, it doesn't exist. Always admit mistakes. Can't close a ticket without calling the client. The general rules like that we'll put there. And so that's an internal process, not a technical process of any kind. And you could argue with the client onboarding process, but I believe it's an internal process. Some people would just make it a project template and that's fine. But those are some examples of internal processes. And I'd put them in a folder or however your documentation system supports, called internal processes, stored under your company name. One more special piece of documentation is pictures. As Tracy mentioned, we started out IT glue heavy, and we do have a lot of clients using IT glue. They're kind of the elephant in the room, and there's probably lots of other documentation systems that handle this better. But some of these things are developed because of the limitations in there. So here's what I have done to help give some structure. And again, your structure can be yours, but think it through and figure out what is necessary and how much is sufficient to get it done. So what we did is, for each client, we created a folder, and the folder had the location name. Now, if they only had one location, some clients have chosen to still create a location folder called main or only or headquarters / pictures, because their folders also store internal processes and technical processes. So that's why we have the name pictures. And then for every type or set of pictures they wanted to group together, they put it in there. So in this case, they had server room, IDF, MDF, and other types of internal locations as they saw fit. As with everything I do, we have a naming standard attached to it. I recommend putting in a date code and a month code, because a lot of people want to see what is the current state of a room. And after you document, for example, a server room, the first time, you might go back a year later and sort some things, replace some equipment, and you want to see what the current state is. So that's why I put the date in there. And we're actually going to talk about the details of the ST04 naming standards, but this is how you name equipment. So this is going to be date and equipment name. And when you're clear on that, it's going to be very easy to find things. Some other little things that I've seen. do's and don'ts that have helped for people using this process. I try not to put multiple devices in one photo. I know it can't be helped in dense server racks, but I might still take an individual picture of each section with other stuff there. But let's say you do grab one photo and it has all 5 devices you want in it. I recommend just copying the photo 5 times and naming it per device so you can quickly find it in your searches. Or maybe you add the device to the title. So you can, again, it's all about searching and finding, or add text, a text field in that same document somewhere to go with the picture to supplement the title for searching, because it's all about what can you find later. Remember, all the pain of naming and labeling it happens once. Finding it happens over and over again. So you want to put in the effort now for the future benefit later. And just because I happen to have this list, here is, I will not read this with you, but here is a list of photos that is especially used during an onboarding project that says, hey, these are the photos that we want to document as an example. While you're reading that, again, feel free to submit questions via the Facebook live message or in the Zoom chat if you're here with us live, and we will answer those as appropriate. Now for some fun.
Just to interrupt a second, Alan, you have those listed as separate documents. In Glue, I put it all into one document. It's called Photos. And then where Glue lets you just kind of insert stuff real easy, I actually have a template under my company. And what my staff does is when they go to a client and collect pictures, they grab the template and copy it to that company that they're taking pictures of, and then they drop their pictures into it. And the template tells you this is the firewall. This is the the demarc point for phone lines. This is the phone system. And they actually plug it in, but I have it all as one document. And I don't do the serial number visible because I almost never can see the serial number on anything. That's just, and like you said, if I get multiple devices in one picture, I will duplicate that picture even in that document. So you can just jump right to the section, but I do it all as one document.
And that's perfectly fine. I mean, if looking at it as a, I don't know the details of that, maybe it's harder to quickly search for a specific photo, but maybe in your workflow cases, people are generally looking at the whole client at once anyways. So
yeah, it's in the title. Photos is in the title. The client, client name photos is in the title, and they can search and they'll see them all when you just scroll up and down.
Excellent. And I think the moral of the story here is document your documentation, right? Because you have that written in writing and your whole team is aware of how this works, it works well.
Yeah. Well, most of the time. It's like everybody follows that, because sometimes I have to go, no, you didn't follow. They just drop them in there. I have to say, no, this is the template and how to put them in. But yeah, most of the time.
And typically the way I get people to follow it, it's certainly harder in the early days, is when they start having to reference them and they find out how easy it is when it's in a set place every time. All right, so typically I get my most arguments under our naming standards. Everybody who's seen this or worked through it with me loves the idea. For some reason, every single one of them wants to change what we've done. I don't get it. It's fine to do so, but why spend brain power working on something that's been developed for you? So naming standards. We are going to, the next couple of slides, we're going to build a name using a series of abbreviations to get us on the same page. I'm going to give you some specific examples, but again, you can change this. You can make it your own. Just think through it. Necessary and sufficient. What's the minimum viable product to cover the cases that actually matter to you? So my basic formula is first initial of the first name plus the next 3 of the second name. However, sometimes you have a company with one name. I hate to include Incs and LLCs. So just use all 4 to have a 4-digit code. What I have found, though, is that even if you started your business from the get-go with this, is there are certain types of businesses that are just known by a different name. I can't help it. When I give an example, because they're a public company, is Chatham Area Transit. It's the bus company from my hometown. Everybody knows them as CAT. They're advertised as CAT, and otherwise it would be CARE, CARE. which isn't bad, but it was hard to get people to change. So I said, I'll tell you what, here is our rule, but whenever we make an exception, just write it down in this chart. So the chart just became our list of bona fide, these are the initials we're going to use for this customer. So here are some random examples I threw up there on how it could either follow our formula or be an exception. But again, document your documentation, write it down. You only have to make this decision once per onboarding. And you want to get everybody on the same page so that we're clear moving forward. And the client naming can apply to many other places, but when it comes to how we're going to name these devices for how we store things, this is going to be the first part of the name, and you'll see how this gets built. Okay, then comes the even more controversial device naming. Essentially, we are just going to, and I do have an error in my slides here. We're just going to create a device abbreviation, and I'm going to show you the list at the end of the device abbreviations that goes after the client name. And we're going to add a 3-digit device number because I have great hopes that most of you guys are going to be approaching 100 devices of, let's say, workstations at some point in your client's life cycle. Even if they're only 50 computers large, by the time they refresh those once more, you're at number 100. So go ahead and start with 3 digits. So here's how the whole thing gets built. Client abbreviation dash device abbreviation, and you have some examples here of the whole thing built out. And then the number, so just go sequential, 001, 002. If you're using an RMM tool, just go look at what's already out there and then add to it. And we're going to talk about building a location list as well. Everybody has a main location, so typically I call that the non-abbreviation. So you'll see some without that. So even in our examples here, let's pretend I have a client of McDonald's in where I'm currently living, British Columbia, Canada. So first initial, nope, this is one name. So we have 4 letters of the client's name, dash. We have decided that firewalls are going to be called FW, and I believe I'll show you that list next. 001, it's our first firewall we're documenting. And they're not at the main location. They are in BC. And again, all we did is write a list of locations and write what the initials are in the shortest possible form. We'll do one more. There's that Chatham Area Transit. They were on the exception list. They're CAT. We have decided to call desktops DT. It's the 11th one we've done, so it's 011. It's the main location, so they don't need a location identifier. Here we go. One piece that was missing on here that I would be remiss to say, I do treat servers differently. I actually call them all, as you see in a very top example for Chatham Area Transit here. For servers, I actually put SRV in there before creating a function initial. Those tend to have a special place, and it sorts them in a special place. And that's why I've chosen to do that in our standard. I'll leave this on the screen for a few more minutes or seconds. You can name these whatever you want. Beware of duplications. I see a lot of variants in how people handle thin clients or WISE or virtual desktops. All right, Dan's asking a question. Walmart, or maybe he's giving a reference as well. Walmart Canada Site 3 Firewall 1 WMC. So he has chosen that his initials for the client are going to be WMC. He puts a site code number after that, and then dash abbreviation for the type of equipment, and then the number. So that works great. I mean, as long as everybody's on the same page, we want everybody always numbering and labeling them the same so we can find them the same way. So that's a great example, and feel free to share more examples as well in the chat. This is our basic list, and you can build this yourself. You can copy and paste ours. Just think through it and beware of the occasional in the device types. Occasionally, I've seen things duplicate, like, oh, this means the same thing for either way. You just have to decide. I'm also a big fan of trying to keep the same number of letters throughout. Like printers wasn't just P. I went ahead and made it PN. So there's 2 letters. I love symmetry. So if we back up from a previous slide, when you were labeling pictures, for example, we put a date code and the device name. This would be the device name. All right. I've only got one more document for you before you launch into Q&A, several slides, but one document. Password naming standards. Occasionally I get a sideways look like it's a password. How hard can it be? But if you've ever tried to find that domain admin password and every single client has one, and is it the local admin, is it the domain admin, which domain, it can get complicated. So here's my thought process on password naming. The whole point is to be able to find things. I like to rely on global search. Using ITDUG as an example, I believe it's the letter P, starts a password search. I can type and find it. It's a lot faster than going to organizations, searching the organization, clicking the organization, going to the password section, and then looking. So I want to think of this as if I want to look through all the passwords in our entire database at once, because that's the quickest way to find things. Therefore, we have to have a consistent method for labeling so we can always find what we're looking for. And every password management system does it differently. That's why they call it PMS. Specifically, in the next couple of slides, I am referencing what they call it in ITDUG, ConnectWise Manage Autotask, which frankly, for the purposes of password storage, uses the same nomenclature as ConnectWise Manage, Passportal, and I'm sure these words and concepts apply to others as well. So let's just break it down. Some of these are pretty simple. Every one of them has some method of, hey, this password's for a client. These are the different words that each system calls it. Keep in mind, if the password is truly for your company, put it under your company. And that's usually not as common a mistake as, well, we have access to their stuff, to our client stuff. Don't put it under your company, put it under your client's organization, client, or company. All right. Now, folders are a great concept, except for only Passportal, the 4 that I've mentioned, actually have a folder construct for passwords. Just know that if you have access to folders, if you're using some other system that has folders, LastPass, others, the biggest benefit of folders that I have seen is controlling access, using it as a type of security filter. So definitely use it for that if you have it available. Sorry, I should give one common example. I would be remiss not to. Common example in Passportal, especially for internal use, is they might have internal use folder passwords that everybody in the technical department can see. There may be some that only the owners can see, like banking information or the finance department. Common use I've seen for folders and password security. All right, usernames. This is pretty darn straightforward. They all call it the same thing. And just put it in there exactly as it should appear so you can copy and paste. And if there are multiple ways to log in, always give the longest, most precise form of that, as in logging into a local machine. You could log in as admin, but it's not very clear. So saying localhost/admin or the actual computer name /admin or the domain name /admin is certainly more preferable. Make it easy for yourself. Hey, and here's one everybody agrees on. Yep, know thyself. I would have thrown in here many password managers have the option to generate random or complex passwords. I would use it, and I would make sure whoever administers your password management system sets up the complexity rules. Typically, there's an option where you can say, hey, when I generate a password, use 3 out of 4 of the complex or 4 out of 4, or make it this long, this many digits, or avoid these characters. You can set that up usually by default so that the passwords that are generated are always meet your requirements. I would definitely use that feature. You should be living in a world where nobody has any password memorized except for the password to their password manager. Another fairly easy one, all of them have, every PMS I've worked with has a URL option. It's typically an optional field because not all passwords require a URL. but they are called the same in all of those systems. Just make sure if it's a web-based application, you provide the URL so you don't forget how to log in. Sometimes those URLs are not self-explanatory. And don't forget those pieces of hardware, such as perhaps VMware, that have to be managed via a URL. And yes, Juan is asking about the recording. There will be a recording coming out to our YouTube channel, and we will post a link to it in the Facebook group, as well as email out a reminder for anybody who registered today. Have a good one. All right, now we're getting to the fancier stuff. I'm going to have to kind of show you two things at once for this to make sense, but let's start with the description field. Passportal, ITGlue, it's called description. In ConnectWise Manage and Autotask, we're talking about the name of the configuration item. This gives you the most flexibility for adding all that other stuff to search based on. Now, in Passportal and ITGlue, the global search field will search everything but the notes column. And in ConnectWise Manage and Autotask, it's just going to search the name. Now, ITGlue will also search the notes. That could be an added benefit for you. So the description is necessary to help you supplement what you're searching for, because again, we're aiming for global search being all you need. But you can make an assumption that the client name is easy to find in global search, as is the password type, and this is that second field we're going to work with together on the password type. And we're going to create a table of descriptions that we want to use in what cases on the next couple of slides. And this is our chance, even if it's off of the documented path. If you want to add something, a common mistake to search for, you can also throw that in description. A common one, QBR. Well, is a QBR quarterly business review, or is it a QBR, or is it a technical business review, or is it a strategic business review, or is it a net admin review, or a VC? I've added before, just at the end of the description, those search terms so that people can find it faster. So let's look at this password type real quick to put the whole piece together. It's called several things in various PMSs. Credential type is what it's called in Passportal. Password category is what it's called in ITGlue. And the configuration type is what it's called in ConnectWise Manage and Autotask. So when we're thinking of this, again, don't forget all of the other search fields. And keep your, I see this, us technical people, we love to make things complex. Keep this as simple as possible. You don't need that many password types. You should be hopefully well under 20. But I've seen as many as 20 and it still felt okay. But I've come into places that had 50 or 60 and it's like, does it really matter if this is an HTTPS site versus an HTTP site for the purposes of storing the password? Heck, what's the difference in a firewall and a router as far as storing the password goes? Maybe even the same for the switch. Maybe network devices is a sufficient enough type to give you the search that you need. All right, let's get into some examples, which I hope I have here. Yep, good. So I'm going to give you a table in the next slide, and we're going to go through a couple of examples, and we're getting pretty close to question and answer time. So please keep them coming in if you have any, or if you just want to share, or hey guys, I did this cool thing. We'd love to hear other examples. As Tracy has already shown us, there are more ways to do this. The important thing is to document what you're doing so the whole team's on the same page. So on this table coming up, just know that I don't have the client username and password fields on here. That's pretty straightforward. I don't have to explain those any further. So we're going to show how description and credential type can work together to help you search and easily find and store passwords. So here's the whole table. I gave an example of domain admin before for the Active Directory user. It was like, well, heck, I'm looking for domain admin. Everybody has one. So did they call it domain admin? Did they call it just the admin account or administrator account? It's a lot of variables that are very common for us. And if we were browsing, we could probably find what we're looking for the domain admin, but I want to make it lightning quick from global search. So we already know the company name is stored in there. So just search company name, and the exact words domain admin. And you find it every time if you agree to this standard. Again, you can change the standard, but everybody has to be on the same page, and then retrieving and storing are that much faster, that much easier. Again, I encourage you to adopt your own policies, but as you see in Active Directory, I have a concept of what is the service name with the words service account. So if I'm not quite sure, I can always search the word service account, see what those are. And of course, for handling individual users, we say first name, last name. Notice we don't just put the username there because we already have that in the username field. I'll abbreviate some more here, but you see how local users are done. Websites, a little tricky. How do you label function names? So I try to give some explicit example in the notes. The way I build my notes field is obviously, if I want to give examples, I do that now. But let's say I'm using this policy now for 6 months. A new guy comes in. He goes, "Hey, Alan, I'm trying to create this password, but I don't know what function to call it." We walk through it, but instead of just answering his question, we answer his question, and we go ahead and throw the example in the notes field. So we keep this updated. Any question you have to answer is obviously not clear in your documentation. So update the documentation to make it clear in the future. And that's true for all documentation, not just password naming standards. Notice for firewall and network devices, I do have those separate with some options like considering adding the brand name. It's up to you, but you fall right back into also having to have your equipment naming standard here. So in this case, your firewall has a password, so just call it the firewall name. And that's already pretty darn unique because of the naming standard we did in the previous slides. You see how applications are done, and I gave you some ideas for how the wireless key is done. But because most businesses don't have just one Wi-Fi anymore, they tend to have internal and guest, or maybe more. I gave guidance there to put in the type that it is for the name, and in the notes put the for the user, put the SSID so we all know where to find and store things. All right, it's a couple of other things you might want to store as meta knowledge, as documenting your documentation. Not going to dive into details on it, but wanted to share these as well. We mentioned if you are maintaining type, subtype, and item in ConnectWise Manage, issue, sub-issue, and auto task, or other types of things like that, that is a definitive list that tends to grow over time. And sometimes you lose old things you don't use anymore. I recommend spitting that out and putting it in a document somewhere. It's much easier to teach somebody how to find something when they can see the whole list versus having to drill down one at a time and look around. For both Autotask and ConnectWise, I've actually been known just to have a report that spits out all the available options in a tree, send it to an email, a Slack channel, a Teams channel once a month, just to keep that list updated and fresh for what's actually in the system. Likewise, from last month's webinar, we have the asset documentation that I call D05. For those playing along at home, or if you have access to theeurekacommunity.com, all these links down here at the bottom of the slide take you directly to those SOPs we have pre-written there. All right, Q&A is coming up in a minute. 1 minute. How do I get this stuff started? How do I write my first process? How do I write my first naming standards? I encourage you to rip off and duplicate, copy our stuff, make it your own. As you decide to make it your own, it can be hard to make decisions via committee, even though I might recommend a small committee, 2 or 3 people to start this. So get them together, make some quick decisions, and then pick a champion to say, okay, we have decided on this naming standard for firewalls. Go name a couple of firewalls or a couple of clients worth of firewalls and report back. What did you find? Oh, well, it didn't handle this duplication, or I couldn't tell this. And then you fix it. After you fix it and tweak your formula for how you're going to do your process, etc., then you basically go from alpha testing to beta testing, right? So go to the whole team now and go, hey, everybody, can you each document, for example, 1 client's worth of this device or 1 client and report back on if this standard works or not? And see how it goes and get their feedback. The beautiful thing besides testing and getting some of their work done is when people feel heard, they feel invested in the process, they're also more likely to follow the process. It's also a great form of training and building a culture around the process. And then you have to make the ultimate decision, which is, do I want to put in a project to fix all these? My general recommendation is no. I don't like spending time documenting stuff that may or may not be referenced again, because we never know what gets used. So typically beyond the team test, where we get a lot of stuff done, maybe you have a type of process or two that you just have to get done and you want to make a project for it, so be it. But in general, I do recommend as you go. Of course, this was designed a little more with asset documentation in mind. So when it comes to internal processes, you really should just get your process done, your naming standard, and your password naming standard done and out of the way, at least team tested, so you can keep it going with the rest of your processes from that as you go. All right, your turn. What do you document? How do you do it differently? What questions do you have? I know Tracy had one interesting way that she stores documents that I would love to hear from her on. And we'll open it to the rest of you. Feel free to use your microphone, your camera, chat, or the Facebook comments feature.
Okay, I mean, I can go first.
Yay.
I do my documentation. I organize it similar to the way a lot of accountants organize their books. So different types of documents actually have a number code with them. And Alan said I could share my screen. I'll share it's easier to see it and to see how I set it up. And I'll give an example. I've got a Glue pulled up here. So
I will stop my sharing so that you can.
Yep. Let me pop over. And can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Do you see IT Glue? Because it's not showing me which screen I'm sharing.
We do see IT Glue.
Okay, cool. It didn't highlight my screen like it normally does. So we've got master processes. We start with 0, and then we've organized them by type of process. And let me just dive into one, finance and administration. And again, not everybody in my team has access into these, just the ones that need to know. And you can see I have the 1000s are dedicated to auto task. I got 36 documents in there. And this is all tied to money related stuff with the cars at the end. And then if I go into auto task, I order them by number. And the point of this is when I make these, I put gaps in them so that all of my contracts, like the silver contracts, 1021, 1022, will stick together because the numbering scheme holds them together. Mm-hmm. So the most commonly used ones are going to float to the top because I give them lower numbers, and the less likely used ones, you can see I'm down to 1090, 10. Stuff that I don't use as often will float to the bottom.
This is like the old basic programming where you give it line number 10 and line number 20 in case you got to go back and add line number 15 and 11.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll talk to my bookkeeper and I'll say, yeah, just look at article 1004. And that's all I have to tell her. And she will go right to the article. So I like doing it. Not everything we have is numbered, though. There are certain stuff. We have our own personal documentation wiki. Let's see. And we have our own knowledge base, like 4200 is our knowledge base. These aren't numbered because this stuff comes and goes so quick. And I'm not interested in order. You're definitely going to do searching on keywords here. And I load up lots of keywords and titles when I do this in Glue. Even I just find it better to put too many words in the title than anywhere else in the document. It seems Glue finds it faster. So I have exceptions to it. And I don't have my clients numbered like this. This is only for our internal stuff that I have numbered.
Okay.
And like I said, it's just easier, especially human resources will say, oh, reference the handbook or reference this or reference that. We'll definitely use these numbers in meetings and stuff. Or we use Teams a lot. So I'll drop just the number in Teams and say, hey, look at article such and such.
I mean, and even though I didn't teach it, I don't know if you noticed, but our documentations when we link to the Eureka community say things like, D04, ST01, which are category name initials and numbers to help, for the same reasons, to keep them organized, sorted, and easy to reference. Our own team, we just say these are for, or Brooks' favorite is, I think, HR06. Yeah, very good. Do we have any other comments from anywhere else? I can now see the video, Veronica, so you can like nod or shake your head. No? Okay.
I've got a couple points.
Sure.
When we were talking about type, subtype, item, and issue, sub-issue for Autotask, we usually like to include like a Z request new type or subtype or something like that. That should kick off some process that you have a template on how to write a new SOP and for that specific thing. So if you create a new type, subtype, and item or issue, sub-issue, then there should be some SOP written for that as well. And then probably the last part of that should be updating that tree that Alan was talking about, like documenting that so other people know that there's a new one there and they don't have to find out by clicking through everything else, because usually they're dependent. So you have to select the type, the subtype, and then the item, and it'll show you the new one. On the other point was something that I've been guilty of in the past is being too thorough in my documentation in terms of every single step getting documented, like click here and this is what the save icon looks like. Here's a screenshot. So I've definitely pared that down a lot. So I'll just be like, click on this and give the specific name. It's on the top navigation bar, and just assume some basic knowledge there and move on. So like Alan was saying, pay attention to who your audience is when you're writing documentation, who will be doing these steps, and that'll help out a lot.
Thanks, Adam. One other point, specifically to IT Glue and I'm sure it's others, IT Glue and OneDrive. The ability to see who changed what last is pretty strong and fast. I let my whole team edit SOPs, and I encourage them to. So if I want to get through 5 quick points that I want this SOP to have, I'm going to write 5 quick points. And the next person who follows it, if they have questions, I'm going to ask them to help fill in the blanks. I mean, if there is something that wasn't clear, add it, fix it. Don't let perfection be the enemy of progress. I know I stole that from somebody famous. All right, I'll do the wrap up. If there's no more questions, feel free to keep the conversation going on our Facebook group, ITDUG. Hey, our timing's really good today. Our next webinar is scheduled for March 31st at 2 p.m. Look for the event in the ITDUG group. It's kind of late, but it's because we roughly have been aiming for the last Wednesday of the month, and it happens to be 5 in March. So the registration is open. We're going to ask the group some more. We know we had one poll out there about what to talk about. I had this crazy idea, perhaps to even have a open discussion. Just, hey, come hang out. Let's see what happens. Rory has a good, quick question in here I would love to address. Rory says, revision control not mentioned. Hey, what's the revision number, et cetera, and date? I should add that to our documentation. It's funny because we actually do that religiously, internally, on our documents. And I've seen a couple of other suggestions too. For us, we put our initials and a date code and a dash, and very few words about what we changed or why we changed it. And we even have our process says, you center it, you put it in italics, and you put it at 8 font size at the very bottom of an SOP. I've seen other pundits out there put a table at the bottom of documents that has similar information, who changed it, what date, and roughly what was changed. So that is a great idea. Dan asked a quick question I would love to try to get to. Free-form content, or do you prefer step-by-step format? For Glue, and do we Word documents or not? I prefer more freeform. Step-by-step is great, but we don't want click by click because screens change and we hire technicians. If it's client facing, we want more of that. So sure, bullet points are great. I might be answering you wrong. Bullet points are great. We want it as easy and quick to read as possible, but just to the level of detail for our audience. And as far as Word docs in IT Glue, I hate Word docs in IT Glue. They now have with their enterprise feature where you can edit the Word docs live, but you have to have an Office 365 license on your own. It gets complex. It's an extra click and it's not quite as good. I just like to use the native editor. Even internally, I'm using OneDrive and Office 365. And we are using Word docs there, but we get to open it directly and we just edit it live there. We don't put a whole lot of effort into formatting because it's not as valuable to format for internal facing documents for the time required, and it makes it more complex. Ooh, Norbert, I don't have an answer for how to back up your documentation system, and we're short on time. I would love it if you asked that question at ITDUG. It hasn't been asked enough. In my case, I'm not doing it. Shame on me, and I'm in OneDrive. So I feel it's at least protected from local disaster, but yes, if the cloud were to mess up and delete, it would delete my local copy and I would be SOL, and that's not good. We do accidentally have backups because of our community site for the most important processes, but not our internal stuff. I would love to see that conversation going. All right, Javier, take care. I see you saying goodbye. We'll wrap up here as well. If you need more resources, here they are. This concludes the meeting. Oh, real quick, Dan says Glue lets you do a manual export, right, for backups. It's kind of a data dump, hard to import last I checked. But yes, I do think there are options there. I would still love to see a live backup independent of whoever the vendor is. All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Would love your feedback in the ITDUG group about what we can talk about next, what we can do better, what we should keep doing, et cetera. And I'll see you around.